Chapter 56. Everyone was in place. Couriers rode daily between the points where the Brotherhood had set up bases. Bartolomeo was beginning to enjoy Ostia, and Pantasilea loved it. Antonio de Majanis still held the fort in Venice. Claudia had returned for the time being to Florence to stay with her old friend Paola, who kept an expensive house of pleasure on which the Rosa in Fiore had been modelled, and La Volpe and Rosa watched over Rome. It was time for Machiavelli and Ezio to go hunting. Chapter 57. Leonardo was reluctant to let Ezio and Machiavelli enter his studio, but eventually he allowed them in. "Leo, we need your help," Ezio said, coming straight to the point. "You weren't very pleased with me last time we met. Salai shouldn't have told anyone about the apple. He got drunk in a wine booth and blurted it out to impress. Most of the people around him didn't know what he was talking about, but there was an agent of Pope Julius within earshot. He is very contrite." "Where is he now?" asked Ezio. Leonardo squared his shoulders. "If you want my help, I want payment." "What are you talking about? What kind of payment?" "I want you to leave him alone. He means a lot to me. He is young. With time he will improve." "He's a little sewer rat," said Machiavelli. "Do you want my help, or don't you?" Ezio and Machiavelli looked at each other. "All right, Leo, but keep him on a very close rein, or by God we'll show no mercy next time." "All right. Now what do you want me to do?" "We're having problems with the apple. It isn't as acute as it was." "Could there be something wrong with it mechanically?" asked Machiavelli. Leonardo stroked his beard. "You have it with you?" Ezio produced the box. "Here." He took it out and placed it carefully on Leonardo's work table. Leonardo examined it with equal care. "I don't really know what this thing is," he conceded finally. "It's dangerous, it's a mystery, and it's very, very powerful. And yet only Ezio seems able to control it. God knows when it was in my power in the old days under Cesare, I tried, but I only partially succeeded." He paused. "No, I don't think the word mechanical describes this thing. If I weren't more of a scientist than an artist, I'd say it had a mind of its own." Ezio remembered the voice that had come from the apple. What if Leonardo were right? "Micheletto is on the run," said Ezio urgently. "We need to locate him, and fast. We need to pick up his trail before it's too late." "What do you think he's planning?" "We're almost certain that Micheletto has decided to go to Spain to locate and liberate his master Cesare, and they will then attempt to return to power. We need to stop them," said Machiavelli. "And the apple?" "Shows an image of a castle. It must be somewhere in Spain because it flies the Spanish flag. But the apple doesn't, or won't, or can't give its location. We also saw an image of a town flying the Navarrese flag, and a seaport with an army gathering to embark there. But the apple gave us nothing on Micheletto at all," said Ezio. "Well," said Leonardo, "Cesare can't have jinxed it because no one's that clever, so it must, how can I put this, have decided not to be helpful." "But why would it do that?" "Why don't we ask it?" Ezio once again concentrated, and this time a most divine music, sweet and high, came to his ears. "Can you hear it?" he asked. "Hear what?" replied the others. Through the music came the voice he had heard before. "Ezio Auditore, you have done well, but I have more than played my part in your career, and you must now return me. Take me to a vault you will find under the Capitoline, and leave me there to be found by future members of your Brotherhood. But be quick. You must then ride post-haste to Naples, where Micheletto is embarking for Valencia. This knowledge is my last gift to you. You have more than enough power of your own to have no further need of me. I will lie in the ground until future generations have need of me, so you must leave a sign to indicate my burial place. Farewell, mentor of the Brotherhood. Farewell. Farewell. The apple ceased to glow, and looked dead, like an old leather-bound ball. Swiftly Ezio told his friends what had been imparted to him. Naples? Why Naples? Leonardo asked. Because it's in Spanish territory, and we have no jurisdiction there. And because he knows, somehow, that Bartolomeo is policing Ostia, said Ezio. We must make all speed. Come. Dusk was falling as Machiavelli and Ezio carried the apple in its box down into the catacombs below the Colosseum, and, passing through the dreadful gloomy rooms of the remains of Nero's golden house, carried torches before them as they made their way through a maze of tunnels under the old Roman Forum to a spot near the church of San Nicola in Carcere. There they found a secret door within the crypt, and behind it was a small vaulted room in the centre of which stood a plinth. On this they placed the apple in its box, and withdrew. Once closed, as if by magic, the door ceased to be visible, even to them. But they knew where it was, and near it they drew the sacred secret symbols that only a member of the Brotherhood would understand. The same symbols they inscribed at regular intervals along their way back, and again at the mouth of the entrance near the Colosseum from which they emerged. After meeting Leonardo again, who had insisted on joining them, they rowed hard to Ostia, where they took a ship for the long coastal journey south to Naples. They arrived on Midsummer's Day 1505, Ezio's 46th birthday. They didn't go into the teeming hilly town, but remained among the fortified docks, splitting up to search among the sailors, tradesmen and travellers busy about their fishing smacks, their shallops and their caravels, carracks and cogs, visiting the taverns and brothels, and all in frantic haste, for no one, Spanish, Italian or Arab, seemed to have an answer to their question. Have you seen a tall, thin man, with huge hands and scars on his face, seeking passage to Valencia? After an hour of this, they regrouped on the main quay. He's going to Valencia. He must be, said Ezio, through gritted teeth. But if he isn't, put in Leonardo, and we charter a ship and sail to Valencia anyway, we might lose days and even weeks, and so lose Micheletto altogether. You're right. The apple didn't lie to you. He was, or, if we're lucky, is here. We just have to find somebody who knows for sure. A whore sidled up, grinning. We're not interested, snapped Machiavelli. She was a pretty blonde woman of about 40 years of age, tall and slim, with dark brown eyes, long shapely legs, small breasts, broad shoulders and narrow hips. But you are interested in Micheletto da Correia? Ezio swung round on her. She looked so like Caterina that for a moment his head swam. What do you know? She snapped back with all the hardness of a whore. What's it worth to you? Then came the professional smile again. I'm Camilla, by the way. 10 ducats. 20. 20? You'd earn less than that in a week on your back, snarled Machiavelli. Charmer. Do you want the information or not? I could see you're in a hurry. 15 then, said Ezio, pulling out his purse. That's better, tesoro. Information first, said Machiavelli as Camilla held out her hand for the money. Half first. Ezio handed over 8 ducats. Generous with it, said the woman. All right. Micheletto was here last night. He spent it with me, and I've never earned my money harder. He was drunk, he abused me, and he ran off at dawn without paying. Pistol in his belt, sword, ugly-looking dagger. Smelt pretty bad too, but I know he had money because I guessed what he'd do and took my fee out of his purse when he finally fell asleep. Of course, the bouncers from the brothel followed him, though I think they were a little scared, so they kept their distance a bit. And, said Machiavelli, none of this is of any use to us so far. But they kept him in sight. He must have chartered a ship the night before because he went straight to a carrack called the Marea di Alba and sailed on the dawn tide. Describe him, said Ezio. Big, huge hands. I had them round my neck so I should know. Broken nose, scarred face. Some of the scars seemed to make him look like he had a permanent grin. He didn't talk much. How do you know his name? I asked, just to make conversation, and he told me, she answered simply. And where was he going? One of the bouncers knew one of the seamen, and asked him as they were casting off. Where? Valencia. Valencia. Micheletto was going back to his birthplace, which was also the hometown of a family called Borgia. Ezio handed her 7 more ducats. I'll remember you, he said. If we find you're lying, you'll regret it. It was already midday. It took them another hour to find a fast caravel available for charter and agree the price. Another 2 hours were needed to victual and prepare the ship. Then they had to wait for the next tide. A caravel is faster than a carrack, but even so, it was early evening before the sails were raised, and the sea was choppy and the wind against them. Happy birthday, said Leonardo to Ezio. Chapter 58. The fates were against them too. Their ship sailed well, but the sea remained rough, and they encountered squalls that took the sails aback. The hoped-for chance of catching up with Micheletto at sea was long gone when, 5 days later, their battered caravel put into port at Valencia. It was a prosperous and booming place, but none of the three, Ezio, Leonardo, or Machiavelli, were familiar with it. The recently built silk exchange vied in grandeur with the bell tower, the Torres de Quart, and the Palau de la Generalitat. It was then a powerful Catalan city, one of the most important trading ports in the Mediterranean Sea, but it was also confusing and teeming with Valencianos, who mingled in the busy streets with Italians, Dutch, English, and Arabs, creating a babel of languages in the streets. Fortunately, the Marea di Alba was moored near to where the caravel docked, and the 2 captains were friends. Ciao, Alberto. Ciao, Filin. Bad voyage? Said Alberto, a stout man of 30, as he stood on the poop deck of his vessel, supervising the loading of a mixed cargo of silk and rare, expensive coffee for the return journey. Brutissimo. So I see from the state of your ship. But there'll be a good sea and a fair wind for the next week, so I'm hurrying back as soon as I can. I won't be so lucky. When did you get in? 2 days ago. Ezio stepped up. And your passenger? Alberto spat. Che tipo brutto. But he paid well. Where is he now? Gone. I know he was in the town asking questions, but he's well known here and he has many friends, believe it or not. Alberto spat again. Not of the best sort, either. I'm beginning to wish I hadn't come, whispered Leonardo. One thing I am not is a man of violence. Where has he gone, do you know? He was staying at the Lobo Solitario. You could ask there. They disembarked and made straight for the Lone Wolf Inn, after Alberto had given them directions and added, darkly, "It is not a place for gentlemen." "What makes you think we are gentlemen?" said Machiavelli. Alberto shrugged. Ezio scanned the busy quay. Out of the corner of his eye he saw 3 or 4 shady characters watching them, causing him to check his bracer and hidden blades. He slung his bag over his shoulder, leaving his arms free for his sword and dagger. Noticing this, Machiavelli did the same, while Leonardo looked askance. Together they made their way into the town, remaining on the alert even though the shady characters had disappeared. "Shall we stay at the same place as our quarry?" suggested Ezio. "It'll be the best place to be to find out where he is." The inn was located in a narrow street of tall tenements, which twisted away from one of the main thoroughfares. It was a low, dark building, in contrast to the sparkling newness of most of the rest of the town. The dark wooden door was open, giving onto a dark interior. Ezio entered first, Leonardo, reluctantly, last. They had reached the centre of the vestibule in which furniture and a long, low counter could only just be made out, when the door behind them banged shut. The 10 men who had been lurking in the shadows, their eyes already accustomed to the dark, now pounced, flinging themselves on their victims with guttural cries. Ezio and Machiavelli immediately threw down their bags, and in one movement Machiavelli drew his sword and dagger and closed on his first assailant. The glint of blades flashed in the semi-darkness of the room, which was big enough for there to be plenty of space to move, helping both sides. "Leonardo," shouted Ezio, "get behind the counter and catch this." He threw his sword to Leonardo, who caught it, dropped it, and picked it up again in the space of a second. Ezio unleashed the hidden blade as one of the men fell on him, stabbing him with it in the side and penetrating his guts. The man stumbled, clutching his belly, blood bubbling between his hands. Meanwhile, Machiavelli strode forward, holding his sword aloft. Quick as a flash, he thrust his sword into the throat of his first opponent, while simultaneously slicing into the groin of a second with his other blade. The man fell to the floor with an anguished roar, fumbling vainly at his wound while twitching with agony. Machiavelli closed in and glanced briefly at his victim, kicking out viciously and silencing the man in an instant. The assailants drew back for a moment, surprised that their ambush had not achieved its purpose, and at the alacrity of their intended victims. Then they renewed their attack with redoubled vigour. There was a cry from Machiavelli as he was cut in his sword arm from behind, but in a moment Ezio was upon his friend's assailant, plugging his dagger straight into the man's face. The next thing Ezio knew, a big man who smelt of prison straw and stale sweat crept up behind him and threw a garrote around his neck. Ezio choked and dropped his dagger, raising his hand to tear at the rope being tightened on his windpipe. Machiavelli leapt over and stabbed at the big man, cutting into him and causing him to cry out in sudden pain. But Machiavelli had missed his mark, and the man was able to thrust him away. It was enough to make him lose his grip on the garrote, though, so that Ezio was able to spring free. The light was too dim to make out the black-cloaked forms of the surviving attackers, but the failure of their immediate assault seemed to have unnerved them. "Get them," an unpleasant guttural voice said. "We are still 5 against 3. "Sancho Dirone nel pecho," shouted another, as Ezio smashed his heavy dagger into the sternum of one flabby creature, splitting it as neatly as if it were a chicken breast. "We are 4 against 3. Nos replegamos." "No," ordered the first man who had spoken. "Aguantels mentres que me escape." The man spoke in Catalan. The big man who had tried to strangle him. The man who still had the stink of prison clinging to him. Micheletto. Moments later the door to the street was flung open and slammed shut again as Micheletto made his escape, momentarily silhouetted in the streetlight. Ezio rushed after him, but his path was blocked by one of the 3 surviving attackers, who was holding a scimitar aloft, ready to bring it down on his head. Ezio was too close to wield either of his weapons effectively, so he threw himself to the side, out of the way. As he rolled to safety, the scimitar came swinging down, but the man had struck so violently, expecting the sword's path to be interrupted by a body, that it continued its trajectory, burying itself in the man's genitals. With a howl, he dropped the sword and fell to the ground, clutching his manhood in an attempt to stop the fountaining blood, and writhing in agony. The last 2 men struggled with each other to reach the door in order to escape, and one succeeded, but the second, already wounded in the fight, was tripped by Machiavelli and crashed to the ground as Leonardo threw himself across him to prevent his rising. When it became clear he would not, Leonardo stood clear, and Ezio knelt and turned him over, pressing the point of the hidden blade into his nostril. "I am Ezio Auditore, mentor of the assassins," he said. "Tell me where your master is bound, and I will show you mercy." "Never," croaked the man. Ezio pressed the point of the blade in further, its razor-sharp edges slowly beginning to slit the man's nose. "Tell me." "All right. He's going to the Castillo della Morta." "What is there?" "That is where Cesare is held prisoner." Ezio pushed the blade. "Have mercy. I speak the truth. But you will never succeed in thwarting us. The Borgia will return to power and rule all Italy with an iron fist. They will swarm into the south and throw the filthy Spanish monarchy out, and then they will destroy the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile and rule them too." "How do you know where Cesare is?" "It is a dark secret known only to Pope Julius and his council, and to King Ferdinand and his." "Do you not think we have spies of our own, even in the Vatican? They're good, these spies. This time better than yours." With a sudden movement, the man brought up his right arm. In it was a small knife, which he aimed at Ezio's heart. Ezio just had time to block the blow with his left arm, and the knife skeeted harmlessly off his bracer and onto the floor. "Long live the royal house of Borgia!" the man cried. "Requiescat in pace," said Ezio. "Welcome to Valencia," Leonardo muttered. Chapter 59. The Lone Wolf Inn was deserted, but there were beds of a sort, and as it was late by the time Ezio and his companions had recovered from the bloody tussle with Micheletto's diehards, they had no choice but to spend the night there. They found wine, water, and food, bread, onions, and some salami, and even Leonardo was too hungry to refuse it. The following morning, Ezio rose early, eager to find horses for the journey ahead. Their ship's captain, Filin, was at the docks seeing to the refitting of his battered ship. He knew of the remote castle of La Motta, and gave them directions as far as he could as to how to find it, but it would be a long and arduous journey of many days. Filin also helped organize their horses, but preparations still took another 48 hours, since they had to provision themselves well. The journey would take them northwest across the brown sierras of central Spain. There were no maps, so they travelled from one town or village to another, using the list of names Filin had given them. They passed out of Valencia, and after several days' hard riding on their first set of horses, Leonardo complaining bitterly, they entered the beautiful mountain country around the tiny hill town of Cuenca. Then down again onto the flat plain of Madrid, and through the royal city itself, where the bandits who tried to rob them soon found themselves dead on the road. From there they went north to Segovia, which is dominated by its Alcazar, where they spent the night as the guests of the seneschal of Queen Isabella of Castile. They continued on through open country, where they were attacked and almost robbed by a gang of Moorish highwaymen, who had somehow slipped through the fingers of King Ferdinand and survived in open country for 12 years. Ferdinand, King of Aragon, Sicily, Naples, and Valencia, was founder of the Spanish Inquisition and scourge of the Jews, with dire consequences for his nation's economy, through his Grand Inquisitor Tomás de Torquemada. But through marriage to his equally ugly wife, Isabella, he had united Aragon and Castile and begun the road to making Spain a single nation. Ferdinand had ambitions on Navarre, too, though Ezio wondered how far the bigoted king's designs would have an impact on that country, where Cesare had such close family ties, being the brother-in-law of its French king. Fighting weariness, they rode on, praying that they would be in time to thwart Micheletto's plan. But despite all the haste they had made, he had had a good start on them. Chapter 60. Micheletto and his small band of diehards reined in their horses and stood up in their stirrups to look at the castle of La Motta. It dominated the small town of Medina del Campo, and had been built to protect it from the Moors. Micheletto had good eyesight, and even from that distance he could see the red scarf that Cesare had hung from his cell window. It was the topmost window in the central tower, and there was no need for bars because no one had ever escaped from La Motta. You could see why. The walls had been crafted by skilled 11th century masons, and the stone blocks were so skillfully laid that the surface was as smooth as glass. It was good that they had devised this plan using the red scarf, otherwise it might have been hard for Micheletto to find his master. The go-between, a La Motta sergeant of the guard, who'd been recruited to the Borgia cause in Valencia some time earlier, was perfect, and, once bribed, he had proved totally dependable. Getting Cesare out was going to be difficult, though. His cell door was permanently watched by 2 Swiss guards from a troop on loan from Pope Julius, all of whom were totally inflexible and incorruptible. So getting Cesare out the easy way was impossible. Micheletto measured the height of the central tower with his eyes. Once inside the place, they'd have to scale an impossible wall to a cell 150 feet up. So that was out. Micheletto considered the problem. He was a practical man, but his speciality was killing, not problem-solving, and his thoughts led him to reflect on the main tool of his trade, rope. "Let's ride a little closer," he said to his companions. They'd all dressed in hunting outfits rather than their customary black, in order to arouse little or no suspicion. He had 10 men with him, and each of them carried, as part of their standard equipment, a length of rope. "We don't want to get too close," said his lieutenant, "or the guards on the ramparts will see us." "And what will they see? A hunting party coming to Medina to re-victual." "Don't worry, Girolamo." The remark gave Micheletto the germ of an idea, and he continued, "We'll ride right up to the town." It was about half an hour's ride, during which Micheletto was more than usually silent, his battered brow deeply furrowed. Then, as they approached the walls of the city, his face cleared. "Rein in," he said. They did so, and Micheletto looked them over. The youngest, a man of 18 called Luca, had no hair on his chin and a tip-tilted nose. He was already a hardened killer, but his face had the innocence of a cherub. "Get out your ropes and measure them." They obeyed. Each rope measured 12 feet, 120 feet when tied securely together. Add Micheletto's own and you had 130 feet. Cesare would have to drop the last 10 feet or so, but that would be nothing to him. The next problem was getting the rope to Cesare. For that, they'd have to contact their recruit, the sergeant of the guard, Juan, which wouldn't be too hard, as they knew Juan's movements and hours of duty. That would be Luca's job, since, as an innocent-looking young man, he'd attract the least attention. The rest of his band, though dressed like hunters, looked like the men they were, hardened thugs. Juan's palm would have to be greased, but Micheletto always carried a contingency fund of 250 ducats, and 1/10 of that should do it, for the whole job. Juan could gain access to Cesare's cell and deliver the rope. The Swiss guards wouldn't suspect him. Micheletto might even fake a letter with an official-looking seal on it to be delivered to Cesare as cover. The outer barbican was massive, though, and once Cesare was at the foot of the central tower, he'd have to cross the inner courtyards and get out, somehow, through the only gate. The one good thing was that La Morta's main function these days was to guard its single prisoner. Its original purpose had been to ward off attacks from the Moors, but that threat had long since been removed, and the massive place was, in every sense other than guarding Cesare, redundant, so he knew from Juan that it was a fairly cushy posting. They'd have to take a change of clothes to Cesare from time to time, so Micheletto thought through the possibilities of Juan organizing delivery of a change of clothes for Cesare, a disguise to fool the guards. Then, maybe, it might work. He could think of no other way, apart from fighting their way in and getting Cesare out by force. "Luca," he said finally, "I have a job for you." It turned out that Juan wanted 50 ducats for the whole job, and Micheletto beat him down to 40, though he didn't waste time with too much bartering. It took Luca 3 trips to and fro to set the whole thing up, but finally he reported back. "It's arranged. He's going to take the rope and a guard's uniform to Cesare when he accompanies the man who takes him his evening meal at 6 o'clock. The postern gate will be guarded by Juan, who's going to take the midnight to 6 gate watch. It's a 5-minute walk from the castle to the town." Cesare Borgia's left leg hurt from the lesions of the new disease, but not much, just a dull ache that made him limp slightly. At 2 a.m., once he had changed into the guard's uniform, he tied one end of the rope firmly to the central mullion of the window of his cell, and carefully lowered the rest out into the night. When it was all paid out, he slung his good leg over the window-sill, hauled the other one after it, and took a firm grip on the rope. Sweating, despite the coolness of the night, he descended hand over hand until his ankles felt the end of the rope. He dropped the last 10 feet, feeling the pain in his left leg when he landed, but he shook it off and limped across the deserted inner courtyard and through the outer one, where the sleepy guards paid him no attention, thinking him one of their own. At the gate he was challenged, at which point his heart went to his mouth. But then Juan came to his rescue. "It's all right. I'll take him to the guardhouse." What was going on? So near and yet so far. "Don't worry," said Juan under his breath. The guardhouse was occupied by 2 sleeping guards. Juan kicked one of them into life. "Wake up, Domingo. This man has a warrant for town. They forgot to order more straw for the stables, and they need some before they ride out on the dawn patrol. Take him back to the gate, explain to the guards there, and let him out." "Yes, sir." Cesare followed the guard out through the postern, which was then firmly locked behind him, and limped through the moonlight into the town. What joy to feel the cool night air around him after so long. He'd been confined in this dump since 1504, but he was free now. He was still only 30. He'd get it all back, and he'd take such vengeance on his enemies, especially the assassin Brotherhood, that he'd make Caterina Sforza's purges at Forli make her look like a nursemaid. He heard and smelt the horses at the appointed rendezvous. Thank God for Micheletto. Then he saw them. They were all there, in the shadows of the church wall. They had a fine black beast ready for him. Micheletto dismounted and helped him into the saddle. "Welcome back, Excellenza," he said. "And now we must hurry. That bastard assassino Ezio Auditore is on our heels." Cesare was silent. He was thinking about the slowest death he could devise for the assassin. "I've put matters in hand already at Valencia," continued Micheletto. "Good." They rode off into the night, heading southeast. Chapter 61. He's escaped! Ezio had ridden the last miles to La Mota without sparing himself, his companions, or their horses, but with an ever-deepening sense of apprehension. After more than 2 years. How? "It was carefully planned, signore," said the hapless lieutenant of the castle, a plumpish man of 60 with a very red nose. "We are holding an official inquiry." "And what have you come up with?" "As yet—" But Ezio wasn't listening. He was looking around at the castle of La Mota. It was exactly as the apple had depicted it, and the thought led him to remember another vision it had vouchsafed him, the gathering army at a seaport. The seaport had been Valencia. His mind raced frantically. He could think only of getting back to the coast as fast as possible. "Get me fresh horses," he yelled. "But, signore—" Machiavelli and Leonardo looked at each other. "Ezio, whatever the urgency, we must rest, at least for a day," said Machiavelli. "A week," groaned Leonardo. As matters turned out, they were delayed because Leonardo fell ill. He was exhausted and missed Italy badly. Ezio was almost tempted to abandon him, but Machiavelli counselled restraint. "He is your old friend, and they cannot gather an army and a fleet in under 2 months." Ezio relented. Events were to prove him right, and to prove Leonardo invaluable. Chapter 62. Ezio and his companions were back in Valencia within a month, where they found the city in a state of uproar. Machiavelli had underestimated the speed with which things could happen in such a wealthy town. Men had been secretly mustering, and now, just outside Valencia, there was a huge camp of soldiers, maybe 1,000 men. The Borgia were offering mercenaries good wages, and word had got round fast. Budding soldiers were coming in from as far away as Barcelona and Madrid, and from all over the provinces of Murcia and La Mancha. Borgia money ensured that a fleet of perhaps 15 ships, quickly run-up troop ships with 6 small warships to protect them, was in the process of being built. "Well, we don't need the apple to tell us what our old friend Cesare is planning," said Machiavelli. "That's true. He doesn't need a vast army to take Naples, and once he's established a bridgehead there, he'll recruit many more men to his cause. His plan is to conquer the kingdom of Naples and then all Italy." "What are Ferdinand and Isabella doing about this?" asked Machiavelli. "They'll be getting a force together to crush it, so we'll enlist their aid." "It will take too long. Their army has to march from Madrid. The garrison here must have been put out of action. But you can see that Cesare is in a hurry," rejoined Machiavelli. "It might not even be necessary," mused Leonardo. "What do you mean?" "Bombs." "Bombs?" asked Machiavelli. "Quite little bombs, but effective enough to, say, wreck ships or disperse a camp." "Well, if they'll do that for us," said Ezio. "What do you need to make them?" "Sulphur, charcoal, and potassium nitrate. And steel, thinnish steel, flexible. And I'll need a small studio and a furnace." It took them a while, but fortunately for them, Captain Alberto's ship, the Maria di Alba, was tied up at its usual quay. He greeted them with a friendly wave. "Hello again," he said. "Those people I told you about, the ones who aren't gentlemen. I don't suppose you heard about the fracas at the Lone Wolf shortly after you arrived?" Ezio smiled and told him what they needed. "I know a man here who might be able to help you." "When do you return to Italy?" asked Leonardo. "I've brought over a cargo of grappa, and I'm taking back silk again. Maybe 2-3 days. Why?" "I'll tell you later." "Can you get what we need arranged quickly?" asked Ezio, who had a sudden sense of foreboding, though he couldn't blame Leonardo for wanting to leave. "Certainly." Alberto was as good as his word, and within a few hours everything had been arranged and Leonardo settled down to work. "How long will it take you?" asked Machiavelli. 2 days, since I don't have any assistants. I've enough material here to make 20, maybe 21 bombs. That's 10 each." "7 each," said Ezio. "No, my friend. 10 each. 1 lot for you and 1 for Niccolo here. You can count me out." 2 days later the bombs were ready. They were about the shape and size of a grapefruit, encased in steel, and fitted with a catch at the top. "How do they work?" Leonardo smiled proudly. "You flip this little catch. Actually, it's more of a lever. You count to 3, then you throw them at your target. Each of these is enough to kill 20 men, and if you hit a ship in the right place, to disable it completely, perhaps even sink it." He paused for a moment. "It's a pity there isn't time to build a submarine." "A what?" "Never mind. Just throw it after a count of 3. Don't hold on to it any longer, or you'll be blown to pieces yourself." He rose. "And now, goodbye and good luck." "What?" Leonardo smiled ruefully. "I've had quite enough of Spain, so I've booked a passage with Alberto. He sails on this afternoon's tide. I'll see you back in Rome, if you make it." Ezio and Machiavelli looked at one another, then solemnly embraced Leonardo. "Thank you, my dear friend," said Ezio. "Don't mention it." "Thank God you didn't build these things for Cesare," said Machiavelli. After Leonardo had gone, they carefully packed the bombs, there were exactly 10 each, into linen bags, which they slung over their shoulders. "You take the mercenaries' encampment, I'll take the port," said Ezio. Machiavelli nodded grimly. "When we've done the job, we'll meet at the corner of the street where the Lone Wolf is," said Ezio. "I reckon the Lone Wolf is where Cesare will have his centre of operations. Once the chaos has started, he'll go there to regroup with his inner circle. We'll try to corner them before they can make their escape, again." "For once I'll back your hunch," grinned Machiavelli. "Cesare is so vainglorious he won't have thought to change the Borgia diehard's hideout, and it's more discreet than a palazzo. Good luck, friend. We'll both need it." They shook hands and parted to go on their separate missions. Ezio decided to head for the troop ships first. Blending in with the crowd, he made his way down to the port, and once on the quay, selected his first target. He took out the first bomb, fighting down the insidious doubt that it might not work, and, aware that he'd have to be fast, flipped its catch, counted to 3, and flung it. He was working at close range, and his aim had deadly accuracy. The bomb landed with a clatter in the belly of the ship. For a few moments nothing happened, and Ezio cursed inwardly. What if the plan failed? But then there was an almighty explosion. The ship's mast cracked and fell, and splintered wood was tossed high in the air. Amid the chaos that followed, Ezio darted along the quay, selecting another ship and throwing the next bomb. In several cases, the first explosion was followed by a mightier one, as some of the troop ships had already been laden with casks of gunpowder. In one case, An exploding ship carrying gunpowder destroyed its 2 neighbours. One by one, Ezio wrecked 12 ships, but the chaos and panic that ensued were of equal value. In the distance, he could hear explosions, shouts, and screams, as Machiavelli did his work too. As Ezio made his way to their rendezvous, he hoped his friend had survived. All Valencia was in uproar, but pushing his way against the flow of the crowd, Ezio made the appointed meeting place in 10 minutes. Machiavelli wasn't there, but Ezio didn't have long to wait. Looking a bit shabby and with a blackened face, his fellow assassin soon came running up. "May God reward Leonardo da Vinci," he said. "Success?" "I have never seen such pandemonium," replied Machiavelli. "The survivors are running away out of town as fast as they can. I think most of them will prefer the plough to the sword after this." "Good. But we still have work to do." They made their way down the narrow street and arrived at the door of the Lone Wolf to find it closed. Silently as cats, they climbed onto the roof. It was a 1-story building, bigger than it appeared from the front, and near the top of the pitched roof there was an open skylight. They approached it and cautiously looked over the edge. It was a different room from the one in which they had been ambushed, with 2 men down below. Micheletto stood at a table, and facing him, seated, was Cesare Borgia. His once handsome face, now lacerated by the new disease, was white with fury. "They have destroyed my plans. Those damned assassins! Why did you not destroy them? Why did you fail me?" "Excellenza, Micheletto looked like a whipped dog. "I must make good my escape. I'll go to Viana in Navarre, just across the border. Let them try to recapture me then. I'm not waiting here for Ferdinand's men to come and haul me back to La Motta. My brother-in-law is King of Navarre, and he will surely help me." "I will help you, as I have always helped you. Only let me come with you." Cesare's cruel lips curled. "You got me out of La Motta, sure, and you built up my hopes, but now look where you've got me." "Master, all my men are dead. I have done what I could." "And failed." Micheletto went white. "Is this my reward? For all my years of faithful service?" "You dog! Get out of my sight! I discard you! Go and find some gutter to die in." With a cry of rage, Micheletto hurled himself at Cesare. His huge strangler's hands flexed to close on his former master's throat. But they never got there. With lightning speed, Cesare whipped out one of the 2 pistols he had in his belt and fired at point-blank range. Micheletto's face was destroyed beyond all recognition. The rest of his body crashed over the table. Cesare sprang back out of his chair to avoid being covered in blood. Ezio had drawn back so as to be invisible but not out of earshot, and was preparing to leap from the roof and grab Cesare as he came out of the front door of the inn. But Machiavelli had craned forward to get a better view of the dreadful showdown, and now he inadvertently kicked a tile loose, alerting Cesare. Cesare looked up swiftly and drew his second pistol. Machiavelli didn't have time to draw back before Cesare fired, shooting him through the shoulder and smashing his collarbone before he fled. Ezio thought of pursuit, but only for an instant. He had heard Cesare say that he intended to go to Viana, and he would follow him there, but not before he had seen to his wounded friend. Machiavelli groaned apologies of all things, as Ezio managed to haul him off the roof. At least he could walk, though the wound was bad. Once they reached the main thoroughfare, Ezio accosted a passer-by, having to stop the man by force as the chaos raged around them. "I need a doctor," he said urgently. "Where can I find one?" Many people need a doctor, replied the man. Ezio shook him. My friend is badly wounded. Where can I find a doctor, now? Let go of me. You could try El Medico Acosta. His rooms are just down the street. There's a sign outside. Ezio grabbed the near-fainting Machiavelli and supported him. He took his scarf from his tunic, and with it staunched the wound as best he could. Niccolo was losing a lot of blood. The minute he saw the wound, Acosta had Machiavelli sit in a chair. He took a bottle of alcohol and some swabs, and carefully dressed it. The ball went right through the shoulder, he explained in broken Italian. So at least I won't have to dig it out, and it's a clean wound. But as for the collarbone, I'll have to reset it. I hope you're not planning on travelling at any time soon. Ezio and Machiavelli exchanged a glance. I have been a fool again, said Machiavelli, forcing a grin. Shut up, Niccolo. Go on, get after him. I'll manage. He can stay here with me. I have a small annex that needs a patient, said Acosta, and when he's healed, I'll send him after you. How long? Perhaps 2 weeks, maybe more. I'll see you in Rome, said Machiavelli. All right, replied Ezio. Take care of yourself, my friend. Kill him for me, said Machiavelli, though at least he spared us the trouble of Micheletto. Part 3. We have reached the last era in prophetic song. Time has conceived, and the great sequence of the ages starts afresh. Justice, the Virgin, comes back to dwell with us, and the rule of Saturn is restored. The firstborn of the new age is already on his way from high heaven down to earth. Virgil, Eclogues 4. Chapter 63. Ezio once again travelled across Spain on a long and lonely journey, almost due north to Viana. He arrived there in the month of March in the year of our Lord 1507. The city that he saw, a mile or so distant, looked exactly like the one in the vision accorded him by the apple, with strong walls and a well-fortified citadel at its centre. But there was a difference. Even before he crossed the border into Navarre, Ezio's practised eyes told him the city was under siege. When he came to a village, most of the locals just shook their heads dumbly when questioned, but when he sought out the priest with whom he was able to converse in Latin, he learned the whole picture. You may know that our king and queen have designs on Navarre. It's a rich land and they want to incorporate it into Spain. So they want to take Viana. They've already taken it. It's occupied by the Count of Lerin on their behalf. And the besiegers? They are Navarrese forces. I think they will be the victors. What makes you say that? Because they are under the command of the brother-in-law of the King of Navarre, and he is an experienced general. Ezio's heart beat faster, but he still needed confirmation. His name? He's very famous, apparently. The Duke of Valence, Cesare Borgia. They say he once commanded the army of the Pope himself. But the Spanish troops are brave. They have taken the fight out to the enemy, and there have been bloody battles in the fields outside the town. I would not go any further in that direction, my son. There lies only devastation and blood. Ezio thanked him and spurred his horse forward. He arrived at the scene to find a pitched battle going on right in front of him, while a fog swirled around them. In its midst, Cesare Borgia took a stand, hacking down any foe who came at him. Suddenly, Ezio himself had to fight another horseman, a Navarrese with his crest bearing a red shield crisscrossed with yellow chains. Ezio slashed at the man with his sword, but his foe ducked just in time to miss the blade, and Ezio nearly toppled over from the momentum. Recovering just in time, Ezio manoeuvred his horse round and back towards the man. The horseman was pulling his sword arm back to strike a blow at Ezio's open flank, but Ezio lunged at him with a lightning flick of his sword arm. The tip of his sword slashed into the man's chest, and he pulled back in pain, allowing Ezio to deliver a mighty blow downwards, splitting his foe's right shoulder down to his chest. He fell without a cry, and was finished off by the Spanish infantryman. Cesare was on foot, and Ezio decided that it would be easier to get close to him undetected if he were also on foot, so he dismounted and ran through the fray towards him. At last he stood face to face with his deadly foe. Cesare's face was streaked with blood and dust, and strained with exertion, but when he saw Ezio, his expression took on a new determination. "Assassin! How did you find me?" "My thirst to avenge Mario Auditore led me to you." They sliced at each other with their swords until Ezio managed to knock Cesare's weapon out of his hand. Then, sheathing his own, he flung himself on the Borgia, putting his hands around his throat. Cesare had learnt a few things from Micheletto about the art of strangling, though, and he managed to free himself by thrusting Ezio's arms away. Ezio unleashed the hidden blade, but Cesare caught the blow, once again successfully defending himself as the battle raged about them. It was then that the Spanish trumpets sounded the retreat. Triumphant, Cesare yelled to the nearest Navarrese troops, "Kill him! Kill the assassin! Tear the maldito bastardo into pieces!" As the fog increased, so Cesare melted into it, and the Navarrese soldiers closed in on Ezio. He fought them off long and hard before exhaustion overwhelmed him. Then he fell to the ground almost unnoticed as the melee and fog swirled around him, and the soldiers left him for dead. When Ezio came to, some time later, he was lying on his back in the middle of the battlefield. He had to push a corpse off him before he could sit up. The battlefield lay under a cloudy, blood-red sky, and in the distance the sun burned angrily. Dust hung in the air over a wide, unmade road littered with the dead. Ezio saw a crow standing on a corpse's chin, pecking hungrily at its eye. A riderless horse stampeded by, driven mad by the smell of blood. Broken banners snapped in the breeze. Groaning with the effort, he stood up and, painfully at first, walked through the field of dead. He found that he had lost his sword and dagger, though the hidden blade and the bracer had not been found and looted. His first job was to replace his weapons. Near him he noticed a peasant sifting through the spoils of battle. The peasant looked at him. "Help yourself," he said. "There's more than enough to go round." Ezio looked for fallen officers and knights, as they would be better armed, but in every case someone had got there before him. At last he found a dead captain with a fine sword and a dagger similar to his own. These he took gratefully. Next he went in search of a horse, as it would be quicker to get around that way. He was in luck. Not half a mile from the edge of the battlefield, well away from the Navarrese camp, he came across a fully saddled and bridled war-horse, its back blood-stained, but not with its own blood, grazing in a green field. Talking to it gently, he mounted it. It kicked a little at first, but he soothed it quickly, then rode it back the way he had come. Back on the battlefield, he encountered more peasants recovering what they could from the bodies. He passed them and galloped uphill towards the sound of another fight. The crest of the hill revealed a level plain below it, where the battle had been rejoined close to the battlemented walls of the town, from where cannon fire issued. Chapter 64. Ezio steered his horse to one side of the battle, through some olive groves, where he encountered a patrol of Navarrese troops. Before he had time to turn round, they had fired their muskets at him, missing him, but cutting his horse down from under him. He managed to escape amongst the trees, and continued on foot, taking care to avoid the Spanish troops, who were prowling everywhere. Creeping closer, he came to a clearing in which he saw one Spanish soldier lying wounded on the ground, while another did his best to comfort him. "Por favor," said the wounded man. "My legs. Why won't the bleeding stop?" "Compadre, I have done all I can for you. Now you must trust in God." "Oh, Pablo, I'm afraid. Mis piernas, mis piernas." "Quiet now, Miguel. Think of all the money we'll get when we've won the battle. And the booty." "Who is this old man we're fighting for?" "Who? El Conde de Lerin?" "Yes. We're fighting for him, aren't we?" "Yes, my friend. He serves our king and queen, and we serve him, so we fight." "Pablo, the only thing I'm fighting for now is my life." A patrol arrived on the other side of the clearing. "Keep moving," said its sergeant. "We must outflank them." "My friend is wounded," said Pablo. "He cannot move." "Then leave him. Come on." "Give me a few more minutes." "Very well. We head north. Follow us, and be sure no Navarrese sees you." "Will we know when we have outflanked them?" "There will be gunfire. We'll cut them down where they least expect it. Use the trees for cover." "Just a moment, sir." "What is it?" "I will follow now." "Immediately?" "Yes, sir. My comrade Miguel is dead." Once they had gone, Ezio waited for a few minutes, then made his way north before veering east in the direction he knew Viana lay. He left the olive groves and saw that he had passed the field of battle and was skirting it on its northern side. He wondered what had become of the Spanish soldiers, for there was no sign of any successful outflanking movement, and the battle seemed to be going to the Navarrese. On his way lay a shattered village. He avoided it, as he could see Spanish snipers concealed behind some of the charred and broken walls, using long-muzzled wheel-locks to fire on any Navarrese troops at the edge of the battle. He came across a soldier, his tunic so blood-stained that Ezio could not tell what side he was on, sitting with his back to a stray olive tree, and hugging himself in agony, his whole body shaking, his gun abandoned on the ground. Reaching the outskirts of the town, among the settlements that crouched beneath its bastions, Ezio finally saw his quarry ahead of him. Cesare was with a Navarrese sergeant, and was clearly assessing the best way of breaching or undermining Viana's massive walls. The Spanish, who had taken Viana, had been confident enough to allow some of their camp followers to settle in the houses here, but they were evidently not powerful enough to protect them now. Suddenly, a woman came out of one of the cottages and ran towards them, screaming and blocking their path. "Ayúdenme!" she cried. "Help me! My son is wounded!" The sergeant went up to the woman and, seizing her by the hair, dragged her out of Cesare's way. "Ayúdenme!" she yelled. "Shut her up, will you?" said Cesare, surveying her coldly. The sergeant drew his dagger and slit the woman's throat. Chapter 65. As Ezio shadowed Cesare, he witnessed further scenes of brutality doled out by the Navarrese troops on the hated Spanish interlopers. He saw a young woman being roughly manhandled by a Navarrese trooper. "Leave me in peace," she cried. "Be a good girl," the soldier told her brutally. I will not hurt you. In fact, you might even enjoy it, you Spanish whore." Further along, a man, a cook by the look of him, stood in despair as 2 soldiers held him and forced him to watch 2 others set fire to his house. Worse still was a man, doubtless a wounded Spanish soldier who had had his legs amputated, being kicked out of his cart by a pair of Navarrese squaddies. They stood there laughing as he desperately tried to drag himself away from them along a footpath. "Run! Run!" said one. "Can't you go any faster?" added his comrade. The battle had obviously gone to the Navarrese, because Ezio could see them bringing siege towers up to the walls of the city. Navarrese troops were swarming up them, and there was fierce fighting on the battlements already. If Cesare were anywhere, it would be at the head of his men, for he was as ferocious and fearless as he was cruel. Somewhere behind him, a Spanish preacher intoned to a despairing congregation, "You have brought this on yourselves through sin. This is how the Lord punishes you. Ours is a just God, and this is his justice. Praise the Lord! Thank you, God, for teaching us to be humble, to see our punishment for what it is, a call to spirituality. The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. So is the truth written. Amen." The only way into the city is up one of those towers, thought Ezio. The one nearest him had just been pushed up to the wall, and running, Ezio joined the men rushing up it, blending in with them, though there was scarcely any need, for amidst all the roaring and bellowing of the pumped-up besiegers, who scented victory at last, he would not have been noticed. The defenders were ready for them now, though, and began pouring the mixture of pitch and oil they call Greek fire down onto the enemy below. The screams of burning men came up to those already on the tower, Ezio among them, and the rush upwards, away from the flames burning the base of the tower, became frantic. Around him, Ezio saw men push their fellows out of the way in order to survive, and some soldiers fell, howling, into the flames below. Ezio knew he had to get to the top before the flames caught up with him. Reaching it, he took a great leap of faith onto the battlements, just as the blazing tower collapsed behind him, causing murderous chaos beneath. There was fierce fighting on the ramparts, but already hundreds of Navarrese soldiers had got down into the town itself, and the Spanish trumpets were sounding the retreat into the citadel at the centre of Viana. The town seemed as good as retaken. Cesare would be triumphant, and his wealthy brother-in-law would doubtless reward him richly. Ezio would not allow that to happen. Running along the high wall, Ezio ducked and dived among the fighting soldiers as the Navarrese cut down the Spanish troops who had been left behind in the retreat. Ezio located Cesare, cutting his way through enemy troops as a child uses a stick to smash through tall grass. Cesare was impatient to take the citadel, and once clear of the men who attempted to block his way, he sped down a stairway on the inner wall and through the town, with Ezio seconds behind him. Ahead of them, the citadel had already opened its doors. All the fight had gone out of the Spanish, and the Count of Lerin was ready to parley. But Cesare was not a merciful man. "Kill them! Kill them all!" he shouted to his troops. With superhuman speed, he ran into the citadel and up the narrow stone staircases within it, cutting down anyone who got in his way. Ezio kept pace with him until they reached the topmost battlements of the citadel, where Cesare stood alone, cutting down the flagpole bearing the Spanish flag. When he turned, there was but one way out, and there stood Ezio, blocking it. "There is nowhere for you to run, Cesare," said Ezio. "It is time to pay your debts." "Come on then, Ezio," snarled Cesare. "You brought down my family. Let's see how you settle your debts." Such was their impatient fury, they closed on each other immediately, man to man, using only their fists as weapons. Cesare got the first blow in, his right fist swinging wildly at Ezio's head. Ezio ducked under the punch, but a fraction too late, so that Cesare's knuckles glanced off the assassin's temple. Ezio staggered, giving Cesare cause to cry out in triumph, "No matter what you do, I will conquer all. But first I will kill you and everyone you hold dear. As for me, I cannot die. Fortuna will not fail me." "Your hour is come, Cesare," Ezio replied. Recovering his composure and stepping back, he drew his sword. Cesare loosed his own blade in response, and the two men began to fight in earnest. Ezio swung his blade viciously towards his foe's head, the blade sweeping a lethal flat arc through the air. Cesare was shocked by the speed of the attack, but managed to raise his own blade in a clumsy parry, his arm shuddering with the impact. Ezio's sword bounced away, and Cesare thrust with his own attack, his balance and focus regained. The men circled on the parapet, flicking the tips of their swords in a swift burst of swordplay. Ezio stepped quickly forward, leading Cesare's blade off to the right, then twisting his wrist and aiming the point of his sword toward Cesare's exposed left flank. Cesare was too quick, though, and slapped Ezio's sword aside. Then he used the opening to flick his blade at Ezio, who responded by raising his wrist and using the bracer to deflect the blow. Both men stepped back, wary once again. Cesare's skill as a swordsman had clearly not been hampered by the new disease. "Pah, old man! Your generation is finished. It is my turn now, and I will not wait any longer. Your antiquated systems, your rules and hierarchies, all of them must go." Both men were tiring, and they confronted each other, panting. Ezio replied, "Your new regime will bring tyranny and misery to all. I know what is best for the people of Italy, not a bunch of old men who wasted their energy fighting to get to the top years ago. Your mistakes are worse than theirs." "I do not make mistakes. I am the enlightened one." "Enlightenment comes through years of thought, not through blind conviction. Ezio Auditore, your time has come." Cesare slashed with his sword, striking an unexpected and cowardly blow. But Ezio was just quick enough to parry, carry through, and, catching Cesare off balance, seize his wrist and wrench the sword from his grip, sending it clattering to the flagstones. They were on the edge of the battlements, and far below, Navarrese's troops were beginning to celebrate. There was no looting, though, for they had regained a town which was their own. Cesare went for his dagger, but Ezio slashed at his opponent's wrist with his sword, cutting into the tendons so that it hung limply, disabled. Cesare staggered back, and his face grimaced with pain and anger. "The throne was mine," he said, like a child who has lost a toy. "Wanting something does not give you the right to have it." "What do you know? Have you never wanted something that much?" "A true leader empowers the people he rules." "I can still lead mankind into a new world." Seeing that Cesare was standing inches from the edge, Ezio raised his sword. "May your name be blotted out. Requiescat in pace." "You cannot kill me! No man can murder me!" "Then I will leave you in the hands of fate," replied Ezio. Dropping his sword, Ezio seized Cesare Borgia, and with a single deft movement, threw him off the battlements. He plunged onto the cobblestones 100 feet below, but Ezio did not look down. The weight of his long fight against the Borgia was lifted from his heart. Chapter 66. It was Midsummer's Day again, Ezio's 48th birthday. Ezio, Machiavelli, and Leonardo were gathered in the newly refurbished Tiber Island headquarters, which was now a proud building for all to see. "It's a very small birthday party," commented Leonardo. "Now, if you had let me design something for you, a real pageant—" "Save that for 2 years' time," smiled Ezio. "We have invited you for another reason." "Which is?" asked Leonardo, full of curiosity. Machiavelli, sporting a slightly crooked but fully healed shoulder, said, "Leo, we want to extend an invitation to you." "Another one?" "We want you to join us," said Ezio solemnly, "to become a fellow member of the Brotherhood of the Assassins." Leonardo smiled gravely. "So my bombs were a success." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Gentlemen, I thank you. And you know that I respect your goals, and will support them for as long as I live. I will never disclose the secrets of the assassins to anyone." He paused. "But I tread a different path, and it is a solitary one. So forgive me." "Your support is almost as valuable as your becoming one of us. But can't we persuade you, old friend?" "No, Ezio. Besides, I'm leaving." "Leaving? Where are you going?" "I shall return to Milan, and then I'm going to Amboise." "To France?" "They say it is a noble country, and it is there I choose to end my days." Ezio spread his hands. "Then we must let you go, old friend." He paused. "This, then, is a parting of the ways." "How so?" asked Leonardo. "I am returning to Florence," replied Machiavelli. "My work there is far from done." He winked at Ezio. "And I still have that book to write." "What will you call it?" Machiavelli looked levelly at Ezio. "The Prince," he replied. "Send Claudia back to me." "I will. She misses Rome, and you know she'll support you as long as you continue your work as mentor of the Brotherhood." Machiavelli glanced at the water clock. "It is time." The 3 men rose as one, and embraced each other solemnly. "Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye."